I do two or three things. Firstly, you will all find a copy. This looks a very good document. It is for you to take away. You don't have to leave it behind, in other words. It's a copy for you. Secondly, although clearly our speakers are fluent in Turkish, and so are some of you, but nonetheless we would like the meeting to be conducted in English, because otherwise we would only have to translate the questions so that everybody else would understand them. So when we get to question time, it will be questions in English. We've got two main speakers. We've got Ezgi Basaran, who's going to speak first, and then Natasha Kurt, who's going to speak second. They're both going to speak for about 10 minutes. And then Professor Hale is going to say, it says on my document, a few words. But first, it's with great pleasure that I introduce Ezgi Basaran. Off you go.
Thank you. So, when we look at the Russian-Turkey relationships, we have to first look if there is a coherent foreign policy during AKP era. I say no. We see more of a convoluted, reactionary set of steps taken as the country goes along. Relations with Russia has also fallen victim to that rapidly changing ad hoc policy structure of the new Turkey. We all know that since the collapse of communism, Turkey and the Russia's relationship depended on common areas of interest such as trade, nuclear power, tourism, and energy. But in the last decade, with Erdogan on Turkey's and Putin on Russia's wheel, a more close-knit relationship emerged since both leaders are very like-minded. What kind of like-mindedness this is we all know. Their authoritarian rule, their chauvinistic rhetoric, their pragmatism, and their opaque way of doing business serve each one well. Let us remember that Turkey's President Erdogan accumulates his power from two things. First, portraying himself as the underdog and the victim. Secondly, portraying himself as being surrounded by enemies from West. This rhetoric reunites and consolidates his constituency in a powerful way. So we can say that the anti-Western discourse and the sense of victimhood from the West are also common ways of steering internal politics for Erdogan and Putin. Okay. On the other hand, the Syrian war had become the main rift between these two pragmatic leaders. At the beginning, President Erdogan was very sure of himself that it was a matter of months for Assad to be ousted. It was in 2012, as we remember, that he bragged about going to Damascus and praying at the Umayyad Mosque. Needless to say, things did not go as he planned. Turkey's Syrian policy has proved to be an epic failure, which brought Turkey, among other entities, against Russia. And as we all know, things got messier when Turkey downed a Russian jet near its border on Syria. During when the relationship was on a crisis mode, Turkey realized that it not only depends on Russia for trade and energy, but also cannot compete with it militarily in Syria. And it was not only Syria at that moment. The other side of the coin revealed another story. After 2013, due to his illiberal policies, Erdogan had fallen from grace in the eyes of the West. And he reacted harshly to that change of heart. In 2013, he infamously said, the European Union is stalling us. Let us say au revoir to the EU and join Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Apparently, having a good relationship with Russia always comes in handy when one gets cross with the West. And the coup attempt on 15th of July restored that relationship with Russia. It was the best moment to revive the transactional cooperation, since losses on both sides already made it an irrational step for both parties. I'm talking about the crisis mode. Putin rose to the opportunity with a narrative that Russia should support incumbent leaders and display solidarity with Erdogan, which resonated very well in Ankara. Erdogan, who was already furious at the EU for not honoring the visa liberalization pledge and 6 billion euros financial aid as part of the Syrian refugee deal, became even angrier at the EU leaders because they were either late or weak in condemning the quartet. Let's remember back then, no EU leader had paid a visit to Turkey to show solidarity, and no EU leader had acknowledged Gülen movement as a highly likely perpetrator of the coup back in July, except the British envoy in Ankara. But Russia was also there. Immediately after the rapprochement, the deal for the construction of a major undersea gas pipeline was signed. Two leaders, Putin and Erdogan, also vowed to seek common ground on the war in Syria. During those fiery days of reconciliation, another interesting thing happened. The special representative to Putin, Alexander Dugin, aka Putin's brain, had claimed to a Turkish envoy that Russia had warned Turkey regarding the coup a day prior. And he continued saying that a coup was attempted only because Turkey had decided to mend ties with Russia. So according to this rationale, Russia was also the target of the coup. There's also one other thing that is very much noteworthy to understand this nature of partnership between Russia and Turkey. Both Turkey and Russia see Gülen movement as evil. Let's remember, Russia was the first country to close down Gülen schools in 2014. Hence, the common enmity brings them closer at a time when Erdogan believes no one is taking a Gülen threat as seriously as they should. Pro-government media in both countries also claim that the pilots who downed the Russian jets were affiliated with the Gülen movement. So this kind of handling of the domestic issues as a leverage or tool in foreign policy is what we will be seeing in the next months from both countries. That's actually a textbook populism. So let's talk about the consequences of this rapprochement. Undoubtedly, this rapprochement has influenced the political and security geometry of the region. In November 2016, the head of the Russian Liberal Democrat Party, Vladimir Zhirinovsky, had a 45-minute meeting with Erdogan on a pivot north, where parties discussed restoring ties and the possibility of creating a union of 5 states, Russia, Turkey, Syria, Iran and Iraq, and also they discussed Turkey leaving to NATO. This meeting, which showed Zhirinovsky's position and rhetoric towards Turkey, changed drastically. It was really hostile only a couple of months ago. It was a hint to the extent of Russian ambitions and long-term goals. So the question that follows is how far Turkey would play along the game that Russia has put forth. In that respect, the Syrian imbroglio hangs in the air as the Damocles sword. The major rift, that is how to deal with the Syrian war and Assad, remains to be unresolved, even though the two states, along with Iran, seem to be in concert on the truce plan. Erdogan's rhetoric regarding Turkey's military position in Syria is also very inconsistent, but for now he appears to have accepted a type of Assad or Assadist structure in Syria currently. Hence, now the primary goal is to deny an area to PKK-related groups in Syria. Nonetheless, the Turkish position involves lots of wishful thinking, which build on the assumption that Russia would accept a no-fly zone, and also Turkish attempts to prevent any corridor being established by the Syrian Kurdish movement. So let's look at what kind of a relationship would Russia have with the Kurds. It actually goes way back to Tsarist period, when the Kurds were seen as an alternative source of support against Ottoman Muslim forces. Hence, actually, Russia's historical relationship with the Kurds is much more long-term than the Pentagon's relationship with the Syrian Kurds. So Russia is also one of the few countries that do not actually acknowledge the PKK as a terrorist organization. Therefore, how Russia would develop its relationship with the Syrian Kurds remains to be seen. So taking all of these into account, let's ask the inevitable question. How far will Turkey-Russia relationship go? How will the honeymoon last? Would Turkey jeopardize its NATO membership? Would Turkey get off the Western train altogether? My answer is no, but you'll never know when you're talking about Turkey. My answer is no because economically, socially, and militarily, Turkey cannot be isolated from Europe. Going that far would not even serve Erdogan's pragmatism. Right now, it fits both countries to compete, Russia and Turkey, to compete with the West. They use foreign policy as a domestic tool. Like I said, it's in their populism. But in the long term, Turkey's orientation would still be towards the West, but maybe one hand holding Russia's. And we should also keep in mind that relationships that are not founded on principle but dependent on two illiberal strongmen are very volatile and can go wrong abruptly, like it happened with the dawning of the jet. On the other hand, there's no doubt that this waltz between Putin and Erdogan is putting a great strain upon Turkey's relationship with the West. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, and we're going to move straight on to Natasha Kirk. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Just talking a little bit to the first speaker's speech. I think I would very much agree with the evaluation of Russia-Turkey relations as somewhat unstable and also subject to kind of volatility, let's say, to some extent, of the two leaders. And we've clearly seen a lot of zigzagging in Turkey-Russia relations over the last sort of 12 to 18 months. But Syria, the war in Syria does seem to have brought them together. It's also important, as I think has been already alluded to remind ourselves that Russia's approach to the war in Syria is very much based on Moscow's belief that secular authoritarian rulers are the only effective bulwark against radical Islam in the Middle East. So it's very much part and parcel of Moscow's broader Middle Eastern policy, if you like. And so it's very interesting to see how Russia and Turkey interact here. So for the Kremlin, radical Islam is a threat to domestic security and the international order. So again, we see the domestic dimension's importance here, clearly vis-a-vis Chechnya and the other parts of the North Caucasus, but also to some extent Central Asia. Keeping radical Islam at bay, it's very much interlinked with its policy in Syria. And so Moscow supports Assad in order to stress the illegitimacy of regime change through popular revolt or external pressure. Because in Moscow's view, these kinds of movements potentially endanger its own legitimacy and create chaos in international relations. And the word chaos has become a kind of leitmotif, if you like, in Russian domestic and foreign policy. So, Russia will talk about chaos emanating from coups, from revolutions, from regime change. So they don't talk about the Arab Spring, or they say the so-called Arab Spring. They talk about them as coups d'etats, essentially. And this is because Russia has very much been, if you like, against the so-called colour revolutions, going all the way back to 2005, the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, and then the Tulip Revolution in Georgia, the Tulip Revolution in Kyrgyzstan, and the Rose Revolution in Georgia. So now there's this sort of conspiracy type theory that these were in some way fomented by the US and NGOs in the West and so on, rather than being, if you like, homegrown revolutions. And that's all part and parcel and all of a piece with Moscow's view of the Arab Spring. So essentially, the kind of drive to ensure that there is no further regime change, such as we saw in Libya, where of course Moscow actually abstained. It didn't vote against the resolution on Libya, but then it felt that the resolution went too far and that regime change was, of course, a very unwelcome result. And, of course, the Maidan revolution in Ukraine is also, it's not seen as a popular uprising in Moscow, so you have to understand that it's a completely different view from Moscow, and all of these coups are the same. It's all about regime change, whether it's Libya, whether it's Iraq, whether it's Syria, and so on. So it's very important, for Russia to resist any kind of regime change in Syria. And so Turkey can play, for Russia, a welcome role, ironically, paradoxically, you might say, given Turkey's former hostility towards Assad. Of course, Russia also is keen to play a major role in the Middle East in order to kind of, if you like, shore up its bid to become a major player in the world. And so that's also, I think, very much informing its position here. As was mentioned earlier on, in 2016, Russia-Turkey relations were on the point of freezing completely, so it's quite remarkable that we've got to this point after the downing of the Russian military jet in Syrian airspace. And of course that led to then the suspension of the visa-less regime in bilateral relations. It also led to the drying up of Russian tourists going to Turkey, which I think was quite a big boost to the Turkish economy. There was also an embargo on food imports, and all sorts of other measures were taken against Ankara. And of course, apologies for the downing of the plane. That was also a big demand from Moscow. So I think really few thought that Erdogan would ever actually apologise for this, but Putin's strategy essentially seemed to prove correct, and so we did actually see Erdogan apologising. And so I think within Russia, Russia's very much seen as kind of coming out on top, if you like, in this situation. It's very much a sort of reassertion of Moscow's claim to be sort of regional and a global power. And so in a very remarkable way, as I said, the mending of Russia-Turkey political relations has been almost as fast as their deterioration at the end of 2015. And Putin and Erdogan have had several meetings now, of course also getting together to talk about energy. So when Putin attended the International Energy Forum, and they have, of course, restored trading and economic relations. They've also talked many times on the phone about Syria mainly, and of course we've also now seen the murder of the Russian ambassador in Ankara. Apparently a street has now been named after him, which has been kind of received in a very sort of emotional way in Russia, and this has had a lot of coverage. So essentially, although one might have predicted that assassination would have had some kind of negative effect once more on relations, it does actually seem that there are enough, if you like, advantages for Russia to remain on a good footing with Ankara for this not to actually affect relations. And I think that there are a number of factors. Obviously, the sanctions, that Russia is enduring, imposed on it by the West, which some might argue have not had as big an effect as one might have hoped, but nevertheless, symbolically, I think, it does affect Russia. So, it does need also, in a symbolic kind of sense, to say, look, we have other friends that we can call on. So, you have Turkey, they have China, they have other resources, they have other countries to which they can sell energy, for example. And so Putin was very clear in saying, after the assassination attempt, that this attack would not actually upset the normalization of bilateral relations. And he even said, we will be doing our utmost to develop relations further on. And of course, despite their initial agreements, Russia, Turkey and Iran towards the end of December, were able to achieve something that seemed previously quite impossible, and they persuaded the parties to Syria's internal conflict to conclude a truce. Obviously, it's a little bit early to say what future developments will have in store for us. Just something quickly about Turkish Stream, which is the gas pipeline. I know there are people here who have more expertise on energy than I do, but I think that the energy factor is becoming more important, as relations with the EU and so on have deteriorated, but also as some EU countries have managed to find alternative supplies of gas and so on. And also the fact that China, although it does need Russian energy, also is on the lookout to try and reduce dependence on Russia, because of course it can also source energy from Central Asian states. So to some extent, I think it's it will be very lucrative for Russia to be able to take advantage of the Turkish Stream pipeline. Now, coming back to Syria briefly, I think that essentially Moscow's decision to really recognise as parties to the ceasefire certain armed rebel groups that it previously labelled as terrorists is actually quite unnerving to the Assad regime, and I think it's going to be quite interesting to see how Russia-Syria relations are actually affected, whether they are affected by this sort of about turn by Moscow. Because really Russia's top military leaders don't see a big difference between ISIS and al-Nusra. So I think there are going to be some difficulties, if you like, in reconciling these different approaches. Another dimension that we should also focus on is the connection to Chechnya and the fighters that are going from Chechnya to Syria. In Chechnya, they're actually essentially facilitating the exit of these fighters to go to Syria. It's all kind of fairly under the radar, but this is a significant development, I think. Russia's actually also been sending officially Chechen troops who are Sunni to try and secure and reassure the Sunni population in Aleppo. And this is all part of its deal with Turkey and Syria. Essentially, I think Russia's task in Syria has been not to actually really defeat ISIS, but simply to help the Syrian army seize eastern Aleppo and strengthen its positions. Because, as I said, for Russia, ISIS and al-Nusra are not really particularly poles apart. Essentially, they're both terrorist organisations in the Kremlin's eyes. So I'll just finish there.
Okay, thank you very much. And now a few words from Professor Hale.
Thank you very much. I'd like first of all to say something more about the economic aspects of the relationship, since we haven't said very much about that yet. And I'd also like to say something about how I see the future of the December 29th agreement to proceed with the ceasefire and later on peace talks in Astana later on next month. Yes, the natural gas relationship between Turkey and Russia is an important one for both countries. In the first place, Turkey is dependent for about 33% of its total energy consumption on natural gas and about 30% of its total electricity production. And last year, about 55% of its total natural gas imports came from Russia via pipelines. It would be very difficult at the moment for Turkey to replace those pipelines if relationships with Russia completely broke down. On the other hand, Turkey is also Russia's second biggest foreign market for natural gas, so the Russians also have a good interest in maintaining their relationship with Turkey. On the point of the Turkish Stream pipeline, that will take quite a long time to build, And in the meantime, the Turks are constructing another equally important pipeline from Azerbaijan, Tanap, which Anatolia pipeline, which will be in position before Turkish Stream pipeline is there. This will put Turkey in a more powerful position vis-à-vis Russia, because Tanap will enable it to bargain with the Russians about gas supplies. Equally, of course, once Russian Stream is constructed, the Russians will have an important interest in maintaining their relationship with Turkey, because they will not want any interruption of the flow of gas through the Turkish pipeline. Apart from gas, Turkey has also suffered very badly from the Russian restrictions which were imposed at the end of 2015 of the on its exports to Russia, especially food exports to Russia, and the sharp reduction in the number of Russian tourists to Turkey caused by the Russians banning package tours to Turkey. And so an important reason for the Turks to want to revive their relationship with Russia was connected with these economic interests, quite apart from considerations about Syria. Getting back to Syria, I personally think that the Turks and the Russians, both of them, have to be given great credit for having moved on this issue. This is an issue which the Americans and Western powers have been trying to tackle for years to absolutely no effect. And it is the failure of Western policy towards Syria, especially American policy towards Syria, which is one of the main reasons for Turkey adjusting its relationship with Russia. It's not just a personal relationship between Erdogan and Putin. I don't think that's important. What's important is the basic strategic considerations, which will be there regardless of the personalities of the two leaders. We can disagree about this, but I happen to think this. After all, the opposition party in Turkey, CHP, the Republican People's Party, has never opposed the realignment with Russia. It's not just a personal thing. Questions. First question, of course, is, can the ceasefire hold? Can both sides keep their ducks in a row? It's not certain that Turkey would be able to control the non-IS oppositional forces. Equally, of course, Assad will be trying to do his utmost to steer clear of complete domination by Russia. If the ceasefire does hold, can progress be made in Astana once they get to talking about a post-war Syria? That would be even more problematic. How can Turkey reach an accommodation with Russia over the future of Assad? The Turks have never said that they are prepared to accept Assad as the future ruler of Syria. They may be prepared to accept Assad as a negotiator at Astana, but they're not prepared to accept him as the future ruler of Syria. This would mean an important climb down for the Russians if that was agreed to. What happens when Raqqa is captured? What is the post-IS